Thank you very much, Chairman England. Appreciate that very kind introduction. And let me say it's a real pleasure to be with all of you this morning. And I want to thank my friend Charlie Harper for organizing this event that I've already learned a great deal. And I thought I knew everything. Find out I don't. Chairman Mullis, I want to wish you the best on forming that wrestling team. And I know a wrestling coach that apparently has too much time. I'm going to send him to help you. Okay? And I want to apologize. We've been a little preoccupied this morning and kind of busy before we got here because, as many of you may know, this rain is much, much worse north of here than it is here in the city. 2 counties in my district, the schools are closed today, and we're dealing with emergency conditions, and we're getting reports of roads that have been destroyed and bridges that have been washed away by this water and mudslides. And so we're trying to provide help to the local emergency responders and local governments as they cope with what is a fairly significant situation. We've had some evacuations, particularly in Gilmer County, but one of those things that we have to deal with. You know, it's hard to believe that in about, 5 weeks, we'll be gathered together under the Gold Dome, and I can't wait for the upcoming legislative session. I think this morning I want to spend just a few minutes talking to you about why it's important to concentrate on what's possible, what's affordable, and what's sensible in the realm of public policy. Many of you have heard me say that and express concern, and I make no apology for this, that too often and seemingly with greater frequency, serious policy debates are hijacked by those who seek to serve their own interests or their own agendas without regard for what is best for Georgia. And that's why groups like Policy Best are so valuable. Charlie and his team examine issues, as you have already seen, and devise solutions that work within our budgetary limits and political realities. And it's my belief that Policy Best is the best public policy research organization in this region. And I'm proud to be here with you this morning, Charlie. Thank you. You know, what does us no good in this process is having those at the table whose only response to every proposed solution is just to always say no. The rhetoric of no makes a great stump speech. It makes a great bumper sticker, but it does little to move this great state forward. What does help are better ideas and practical solutions that enable our state to achieve the next level of greatness. We saw that kind of display during last year's session with the debate over transportation infrastructure funding. You know, there were kind of 2 groups that we had there in the General Assembly. We had those who responded with constructive feedback and input that added value. And then we had those who simply said no. And I would ask in meeting after meeting, if you have a problem, bring me a better idea. I just can't do this. Just say no. But I believe that Georgia has come too far and that we have worked too hard for us now not to be willing to sometimes have to take on the tough votes and to do the people's business. The Transportation Funding Act, or House Bill 170, made the first significant adjustment to how we fund transportation in this state in more than 40 years. It takes into account the declining purchasing power of state fuel taxes It also compensates for unreliable federal funding. That unreliable federal funding forced the Georgia Department of Transportation just recently to hold back $123 million in projects that would have been let this month. That's serious money by any measure. House Bill 170, thank you very much, may well be one of the most discussed and debated pieces of legislation to move through the Georgia General Assembly in recent history. It went through many revisions as it went through the committee process, beginning with a study committee, a joint study committee between House members and Senate members, and they were joined by people that were from outside the legislative process, and I was fortunate to be able to recruit Edward Lindsay, who was recently outside the legislative process, to be a part of that. But they did good work. And they brought back to us some findings and some recommendations and some proposals. Those then went through the legislative process. Some members of the Transportation Committee voted against the bill initially in some of the initial early hearings, only to vote for it on the floor once they had had their concerns allayed and the problems that they saw in the bill pointed out, and those have been addressed. That's what's good about the legislative process. It's a give and take process where people sit down together and reason together and come up with the best of available solutions. While I think we have done a great deal of work on modernizing our transportation funding, I will be very candid with you and tell you that issues that are so vital, like education, healthcare, transportation, are never done. We cannot afford, because of growth, innovation, and other factors, to ever rest on our laurels or grow complacent with the status quo. As we look forward to next session, I think you'll see transportation remain at the forefront of policy discussions. With the world's busiest airport in one of America's major metropolitan centers, transportation is clearly the lifeblood of our capital city's economy, and therefore is critical to the entire state. One of the facets of House Bill 170 that attracted some attention was the state's first ever funding for transit programs. The State Road and Tollway Authority has begun accepting grant applications from transit systems for that funding, and I look forward to seeing the fruits of that investment. With more than 125 transit systems across Georgia, we can no longer afford to allow transit to be an afterthought, particularly with a metropolitan area having the size and density of Atlanta. MARTA, I believe, is an example of how when you put the right people and the right policies in place, good things can happen and performance can improve. I believe Keith Parker has done yeoman's work in righting the ship at MARTA, and I appreciate his dogged determination to turn that organization around. With 3 straight years of balanced budgets, we were confident enough this past session to permanently remove the 50-50 funding restriction. That requirement that half of MARTA's budget go toward operations and the other half toward capital projects no longer made sense. Provided MARTA submits to regular management audits and continues to perform well, I see no reason for that restriction to return. I know there has been discussion since we adjourned at the end of the last session about the possibility of MARTA expanding and how such an expansion would be funded. And I know that debate is likely to continue this session. I plan to rely on the local delegations from the MARTA counties to guide our discussion, because I trust they will look out for the best interest of their constituents and the entire state. That said, I want to be clear on something with regard to MARTA and transit in general. One of the things about enacting the best policies is the willingness to change your opinion when new data and new facts are presented. I don't know if MARTA will expand, and if it does, I don't know what it might look like. But what I do know is that major companies who seek out our state want reliable public transit options in Metro Atlanta. If we expect to continue to attract global firms such as Mercedes-Benz, we have to be willing to put the past in the past and think more about the future. That doesn't just mean concentrating on metropolitan Atlanta, however. We've got economic engines along our coast in the ports of Savannah and Brunswick. Ships that cross the Atlantic Ocean and come through the Panama Canal are moving more and more goods through our ports every month. We are seeing record growth in port traffic, and that means real dollars and real jobs for Georgians all over the state. I'll borrow a little Charlie's Own writing to give you sort of the 30,000-foot level view of things. In the year 2000, the Port of Savannah wasn't even among the top 10 ports in the country. Today, it's number 4 and remains the fastest growing port in the entire country. All of the revenues generated by the ports are reinvested in the ports. During the past decade, $807 million has been reinvested in our ports. Over the next decade, $1.4 billion is planned to be added to the infrastructure of our port. That's why projects like the Savannah River harbor expansion are so vital. By increasing the depth of the shipping channel in the Savannah River, today's new larger ships can call on the Port of Savannah. And I want to again express my appreciation for all of the hard work by our Ports Authority, state and local officials, as well as our congressional delegation to make the dredging that is going on as we speak a reality. If you see a theme developing in what I've said, that's no accident. Whether we are talking about roads, bridges, public transit, or our ports, we have to look beyond that which is politically expedient and seek out real solutions. Those policies that will empower the continued economic growth of this state or choose stagnation. That's why we'll continue to explore ways to keep our public education system strong. That's why we'll look at ways to keep health care accessible and affordable. That's why we'll continue forging public-private partnerships to ensure a ready workforce in Georgia. We're blessed with natural beauty in every corner of this state and abundant natural resources. God also granted Georgians some of the best neighbors and southern hospitality you could want. What will determine whether our children and grandchildren see a better tomorrow isn't poll numbers or popularity contest. It's the work that we do today. What matters to those who come after us is whether we expanded economic opportunity, lifted up our educational standards, and improved our quality of life.